Welcome into Yappin Sports right here on IdahoSports.com. I'm Lance Taylor, your host. You can also watch this show just so you know on IdahoSports.com's YouTube channel, Facebook page, and X account. You can also listen to this show on IdahoSports.com or wherever you can download and subscribe to podcasts. Welcome in today. We got a full show for you today. It's going to talk about the NIL, the transfer portal. If you remember Yappin Sports, we get into national topics primarily that affect local colleges and other things that national topics have effect on. I'd like to bring in my co-host for today, our guest Brandon Baney. Brandon is the producer for basically everything IdahoSports.com, and having him in here on Yappin Sports. Now, a couple things. We really want some engagement from the people who are listening to this show. The engagement, you can just simply reach out to Brandon at IdahoSports.com. Once again, he's our producer, Brandon at IdahoSports.com, because we want to know how you feel about these topics. We want to know what you have to say. And I'm going to pick out my favorite shout out that somebody does each week. My favorite shout out, and I'm going to send them a shirt, a Yappin Sports shirt. So once I contact you, I'll just get your size and so forth, and we'll get going from there. Brandon, are you there?
Lance, what's up? I've arrived from the mothership.
Good. The mothership is good. It is very good. Folks, Brandon Baney again. He is our producer for everything, IdahoSports.com. Brandon, we're going to do some chatting today. We're going to do a number of shows on this as time goes on, as I've spoken to different college athletic directors, coaches, former players, and so forth, so we can really get this topic narrowed down. And again, we want you as fans to shout out those who are listeners to this show, give us shout outs, and give us your takes on these things. And as we get into it, what we're looking for when you reach out to us is we want substance. So we're going to be talking about the NIL, for example, is one of the things we're talking about today, the NIL and the transfer portal. So when you shout out and you say something about the NIL, don't just say, well, the NIL is going to ruin college sports. We want to know from you why you think it's going to ruin college sports, or the transfer portal or what it's done or things like that. Or if you think it's a benefit, or if you think it's basically neutral, that it doesn't really have an effect one way or the other. So Brandon, let's kind of get started on this today. As we talk about the NIL, name, image, likeness. Back in 2021, the Supreme Court ruled that college athletes can make money. We've seen the transfer portal. The transfer portal was in effect really before that. We've seen some of that, but the NIL, boy, that changes a lot of things. It changes a lot of things in sports. I mean, I remember going back, I remember a number of years ago, University of Utah, there was an athlete that was on their basketball team. It was almost a decade and a half ago, but lost a parent. Parent had passed away. The coach buys him a couple burgers at McDonald's, and they go on sanctions for it. Things like that. That happened back in the day. But the NIL, when I first heard it, there was even possibility of it coming. My first thought was, this is going to be a disaster. There is no way that this can turn out good. Now, I hadn't thought of every side at the time. However, just my initial thoughts were that it wasn't going to be okay. And it wasn't that there didn't need to be changes. I was one that looked at, scholarships of colleges. And I was one that felt like a full ride needs to be a full ride. If you're on a full ride, that's what you need to be on. And we were hearing these horror stories of athletes being told they were on full rides. They get there, but maybe food wasn't covered, or maybe they had to come up with books or this, that, and the other. If you're told you're on a full ride, that's a full ride. You shouldn't have to be begging for McDonald's hamburgers at the end of the day from somebody and happen to hide it under the table so that it doesn't get, noticed and you get sanctions. Brandon, what were your initial thoughts?
Yeah, so I feel like I'm well prepared to address the topic, Lance. I'm wearing my Team Australia baseball shirt today, and it wasn't that long ago that American high school players were going to Australia or going to foreign countries. The Ball family famously did this, where instead of going to college, hey, we'll go play overseas, get paid for our services, and then we'll enter the NBA draft. Well, now that's swung the other way, where we have Australians and Lithuanians and all of these Europeans and foreign players coming to America to try and play in college because the big payday's coming. And so it's been really fascinating to see that pendulum swing so wildly in just such a short amount of time.
Well, I think you hit it there. And, I think if we look at the pros of what the NIL brings to this, and possibly even the transfer portal, again, we'll kind of pop back and forth on these topics. If you look at some of the pros, one of the things is it is bringing in more talent. You look at a lot of foreign players that are in the NBA right now, and you look up their profiles, and a lot of them played college basketball right here in the United States. In fact, some of them played high school ball, especially with the academies that you have. We see a lot of them come and they'll play high school ball and then go into the systems here. So really, even though they're born in another place, a lot of them are, products of American sports. In fact, Ali Khalifa, the center last year for Brigham Young University that now is at Louisville, that transferred, well, he's from Egypt, but he played his high school ball in Australia. So he really is not a product of Egyptian basketball. He's a product of Australian basketball and then coming over and playing college ball in the United States.
Yeah, and it just reminds me of it used to be to play college sports, you had to be from a certain social class. You had to have the wealth to be able to play internationally and play in the best leagues. But through outreach programs like you're talking about, some of these global academies that are bringing in these talented athletes from third world countries and lesser known areas, it has kind of evened the gap. I think about in baseball, a lot of Major League Baseball teams have set up baseball academies in the Dominican Republic, and kids as young as like 13 and 14 are now. But more importantly than the athletics part of it is it's providing stability. It is providing an education. Now we could argue, how good is that education, but it is providing some stability and education for these young men and women that may not have had that chance otherwise. So there are some positives from the globalization, and it all ties back to the NIL. There's definite positives to athletes being able to be compensated for their services, but the question is how much is too much, right?
Yeah, well, and I think that's the negative that people have always looked at is it's great for the individual. What is it going to do for the sport? What is it going to do for the game of basketball, the game of football? Now, certainly I think we're going to see some players stay in college longer because, in fact, here's a prime example. You look at Cam Rising down at University of Utah. It seems like he's been there for a decade, but he's coming back for his senior year there. Well, he could have gone into the draft. He was injured last year, didn't have a stat line, but teams knew how good he was. But he could have gone into the draft, maybe been somewhere between a 5th to 7th round pick. And, but there's no guarantee there. Comes back to University of Utah for another year. He's guaranteed X amount of dollars coming through the NIL. And, for a player like that keeps a player like that around. I think, in basketball, that's kind of been the premier sport of the one and dones where, football, you got to be 3 years removed from high school. One and done in basketball has kind of been the thing. We've seen it a lot, particularly in your schools like Kentucky. Duke has gotten to that point, North Carolina, a lot of one and dones out of those programs. And I think now you might run a better chance of keeping those players longer, which what does that do? That raises the experience, raises the talent in those schools to keep them around.
Yeah, and it also kind of caps the growth of all those freshmen that are coming in too, right? Where in years past, you could come in as a freshman and be a starter day one. Well, that may not be as clear cut now with so many upperclassmen staying. And the COVID year is finally going to be over this year. That extra year of eligibility that was granted to all it made things really difficult to keep track of, well, who's got eligibility and who doesn't. So it kind of caps the growth for those freshmen that are coming in, where in years past they could come in and be a day one starter. And also, as a college coach, a lot of times when you are recruiting a high school athlete to come join your program, doesn't matter what the sport is. At the same time, you may have a player or two coming from another university in the transfer portal that you weren't banking on, and all of a sudden this kid that was promised a scholarship, well, sorry, that went away. It's all very fluid. And I guess it's teaching our high schoolers to be adaptable and flexible, but really it's causing a lot of chaos and a lot of uncertainty.
Well, I was watching an interesting interview with Draymond Green and his former college coach, Tom Izzo. And one of the things that Draymond Green brought up is that they were playing Ohio State his freshman year. And Ohio State was a really good team, but Michigan State had kind of been rolling over everybody. They went in and they beat Ohio State, and he didn't get a minute in that game. He was just a freshman. I mean, who would ever guess that Draymond Green wouldn't get a minute in any game? But he didn't get a second in that game. And he was telling Tom Izzo in the interview, he says, I just was so mad at you, just hating you for that I didn't do it. But he says, we had a lot of upperclassmen and stuff. And he says he called his mom afterwards and told his mom, I just got to get out of here. I've got to get out of here. And his mom said, hey, you made your bed, you lie in it. This is where you committed to go. You stay there. Well, of course he stayed there. Look at the career that he had while he was there, and look at the career he's had in the NBA. And Tom Izzo brought up to him, he says, yeah, but look where you are now, because you did have to go through this, And I think one of the travesties with the portal, and again, I'm not against the portal. I've got grave concerns of how it's used right now. I think there's a place for it, but I think there needs to be some more limitations on it. We'll get into that in a moment. But one thing with the portal is athletes who go to college and don't want to go through the hard things, don't want to play that time behind somebody that actually oftentimes makes you better as you get up in your years in college. I think a lot of those athletes, what happens is they say, well, I'm just going to go in the portal and I'm just going to move on. Just going to go in the portal. They don't have to go through hard things. Well, what happens is a program now picks up that same problem that they were at their previous school. Where what happens in the new program? I mean, you can't promise every player that comes into your system a starting job. And the transfer portal, now the benefit, the other side of that, is transfer portal allows teams to really supplement their roster. The super teams have by and large failed when everybody on your team is a scorer. Everybody on the team has to get their shots and stuff. What places are able to do with the transfer portal is they're able to bring in sometimes good role players as well. I think UConn's been the prime example of this, where not everybody on their team is a superstar, but look at their national championships. And a lot of it is they've realized we don't need 12, 13 scorers on our team. We need distributors as well. We need people that are willing to come in and take pride in our best scorers getting the opportunities to score, making sure that they have the ball in their hands and stuff like that. I think teams are figuring that out, and they're able to supplement their roster that way. That's one of the pros.
Yeah, and like you said, UConn is kind of the shining example, or teams that have had success have used the transfer portal to supplement their roster, not entirely reconstruct it. We're talking a lot of basketball, and I just think of like St. John's last year, or like Memphis, Penny Hardaway, man, he brought in a lot of guys that on paper looked good, but there's that old thing called chemistry, and how is everybody going to gel together? When it's only one or two pieces you're adding, it's a lot easier to incorporate those pieces, where you're going 9, 10, 11 guys from the transfer portal. Like, who knows how that's going to work out? It's really going to separate, I think, the good coaches, the good X's and O's coaches from the good recruiters, because anybody can recruit now with money, with NIL money. Yeah. You used to have to work at it to recruit and bring guys in. The money's the equalizer. And now it's okay. You've got all this talent. What are you able to do with it? And I think some coaches already are being exposed as not being that great when it comes to incorporating.
Well, I think what you look to is, look at all the talent that Kentucky's had. But look how many times they've been eliminated, if not in the first round, at least early on in the NCAA tournament. Of course, Calipari, moved on. Mark Pope from BYU taking that job, but I think with a lot of these athletes, and this is kind of the downside, I think there needs to be possibly some kind of contract along the way with this. These guys are free agents every single year. NBA players are not free agents every single year. But what we're doing is we're giving that ability to these college players to say every single year you're going to be a free agent. And I think there's some downside to that, because again, you get an athlete that maybe doesn't want to go through some hard things, And it's just easier to say, well, I'm just going to go into the transfer portal. And then a number of these kids that go into the transfer portal, nobody picks them up. And yet the college they just left now has already recruited somebody to come in and take that spot, or they pulled somebody else out of the transfer portal, take that spot, and then there's no place for them to be. Coaches, in my opinion, I think one of the downsides of it is that coaches have to re-recruit their own team every single year. And that really, I don't think should always have to be happening. Now, there's another side to that, though, Brandon. And the other side is that there were a lot of athletes that came in expecting to be at a school for 4 years for their career. And at the end of 1 year, a coach says, you're not really benefiting our program. See ya. So there's got to be loyalty from both sides. You can't expect to be able just to cut anybody you want to cut, but then expect a kid that stays not to leave if that's the deal. There should be some commitment both ways.
Yeah, that blade definitely cuts both ways. To me, it's simple, right? The fix is really simple. I call it the Spider-Man rule. Everybody gets one. Okay. Everybody gets one transfer. Okay. Whether it's because of playing time, family situation, the coach left, whatever, you get one, you use it and you're done. Now, if you want to transfer a second time, we go back to the old rules. You're going to have to sit out a year.
Yeah.
You're going to have to get clearance from both of the schools that are participating in it. Now, there's obviously some exceptions, right? Emergencies, hardships. I think a coach change should automatically trigger it. But to me, that's like the easiest thing to fix is the transfer portal. Like everybody gets one and then tamp it, right?
Yeah. I think that is I think the complex issue really is the NIL. I mean, you take a kid like Dalton Connect that, he was at Northern Colorado, goes to Tennessee, of course, was a first round pick for the Lakers this year. I was really upset when he was available that my Utah Jazz didn't pick him up, but he had a really good summer league with the Lakers. But ultimately, why does he go? He goes for the NIL money. And this is one of the challenges that I have with the NIL. One of the real problems that I see with it is that no longer are coaches really going and sitting in living rooms and saying, hey, this is what we can do for your kid. This is, they come in, it's a family environment. We're going to make sure that they're going to class on time. We're going to make sure that they're getting grades. We're going to make sure that if they blow a knee, that they're going to have a college degree and they're going to be taken care of. Now, all a kid wants to know is, how much money am I getting if I come to your school? I just want to know how much money I'm getting. And the problem that I see them getting into too is these places that are giving money, how much influence do they have on where a kid goes? I mean, there's always outside pull, and there's always different voices of go to this school, go to that school, go to Boise State, go to Washington State, go to Oregon, whatever it is. But what happens when these companies say, hey, we'll sign you to this big, huge deal, but only if you're going to LSU, or only if you're going to Texas, or only if you're going to Oklahoma? What happens in a scenario like that? And I do not want to see the deep pockets being what commands where a kid does or does not go as far as the third-party people are that are given money.
Yeah, and this is a more complex issue, like you said. I think the model we're on right now is not sustainable. The University of Miami is not going to be able to turn to its boosters every year and say, hey, $3 million we need to keep the roster in play. Like people run out of money. Eventually the market is going to correct itself. And kudos to the guys that are in it right now, because they're getting grossly overpaid for their services. They are. This, I feel like, is an easy fix too, though. I think if you're a freshman coming in out of high school, hey, you don't get a single cent of NIL money until you sign this contract or until you play a year and you have committed yourself to our program. Then a local business can come hire you to do a commercial, whatever. But I feel like without that initial buy-in where you have to work for your money, that's the thing. America is great, right? Capitalism is great. You can go out and make as much money as you possibly want, but you got to work for it. You're not just handed money. That's social.
That's right.
That's social. That's what the NCAA is right now. It's socialism. Hey, we're going to give you $2.5 million without even having seen you pick up a basketball in our uniform yet. And so I think that would be the way to correct that.
Yeah, you might be sitting on the bench or standing on the sidelines, the entire year. Well, what's that company getting out of it now? They're not getting much out of it. Again, have that kid on scholarship. That's fine. Have their school completely paid for that year. But again, before they've earned something, some problems there. And I think, as you've said, the market will correct itself. I think what scared me was, you go back to, again, June of 2021, when the Supreme Court said, yes, they can legally get paid. There was no boundaries to it. That's the thing. There was absolutely no boundaries. And every time the NCAA tries to set boundaries on things, the big schools say, well, we'll just leave. We'll just create our own thing. And we'll just leave the NCAA behind, So there's a little bit of that back and forth on that. But we look at a lot of these pro athletes. The average athlete is bankrupt how many years after retiring? Is it something like 5 years after retiring? And a lot of these guys are grown men. Now we're throwing big money at kids that are even younger.
Yeah.
Are they being taught what to do with that money? Are these kids that are they going out and blowing it? There was a kid that got a check. In fact, this came from an interview that I watched as well. A kid that got a check, took his whole family to the Bahamas, blew everything he had before he had ever played a down of anything. And it was all gone, and those around him might not know how to handle money either. And they allow that to happen, where someone like you or I, if it was one of our kids, we'd look and say, hey, knucklehead, we're putting that in an account and we're saving that, because guess what? Just like any other athlete, you're one blown knee away from never playing anything other than rec ball for the rest of your life. So get an education, put that money aside, and we're already seeing some of that happen.
Lance, this is this is crazy how this has come together. So I'm going to divert for just a second. I'm a man of faith, like you are. I read my Bible every morning. I'm through the Bible in a year. I was reading Proverbs today, and there's a proverb that says, and I read this this morning: dishonest money dwindles away, or money accumulated quickly dwindles away. But whoever gathers money little by little makes it grow. And so, yes, if you've got to work at it and save it, you're going to cherish it a lot more, and you're not going to spend it all right away. Whereas you get that huge payday up front. Yeah. Of course you're going to go buy all the lavish things. It's crazy.
Well, we even saw players that declared bankruptcy before the end of their careers. Allen Iverson went broke several different times before his career even came to an end. There's things like that. And the thing is, you have such a great talent in somebody like an Allen Iverson. He's still one of my favorite players. I actually played the game. I just loved Allen Iverson. But you take someone who's young and you put him in a situation he's never had those kind of things. What do you expect is going to happen? They need to sit these athletes down and say, guys, this is what you need to do to manage your money. This is what you need to do to make sure that you are taken care of for the rest of your life. Because again, you might not get drafted. This might be your pinnacle. You might get injured and never play the game, at least at that competitive level. Again, like I said, maybe nothing more than rec league. So here's what you need to do. There needs to be some responsibility, I think, put up on the shoulders of the people who are giving the money as well, to offer some education, some counsel, some advice for these young athletes.
Yeah, I think this is something that, I think of Dave Ramsey, the financial guru, right? His 7-step program is like very applicable to everybody. I feel like this is something that should be taught in high schools. I certainly didn't get that in my high school in Montana. I don't know about your experience, but we weren't taught those financial basics and necessities. And yes, if it hasn't happened at the high school level, it definitely should happen at the college level, where, hey, you have to take this course first. You have to take this Dave Ramsey course and tell us what you learned about it before you can get that money. Otherwise, like we said, it's just too tempting to go and splurge on all those fine things. Yeah.
I look at high school. Okay, algebra, fine. But why is algebra the requirement? It's not for the average person. That's not what they need for life experience. They need to be taking a math in the real world class, learning how to invest, learning how to do the things that are going to help you on a day-to-day basis. And, it's going to be the same teachers. No one's going to lose their job if algebra is not the requirement. But it's just, we have too many kids. In fact, I've said it even at our college level. We got a lot of kids graduating with a degree, but no education. And you've got to be prepared to go out into the real world. You look at how much money people pay in interest. Young people don't understand compound interest, what that does. Well, let me tell you what, people who, and I actually heard this from a very wise man, people who understand compound interest make compound interest. People who don't understand it pay it. And those are it's not that we all don't have to pay it at some point of our life. There's reasonable purchases, but I came from a time when you didn't finance a couch. There was no such thing as financing a couch, financing a TV. You saved until you bought it with cash. You didn't go into unreasonable debt for this. So all of a sudden, a $600 TV turned into a $3,000 TV by the time you were done with all those payments. A house is more reasonable, a car is more reasonable. Those are more necessities, but it just shows there's a lot of lack of education in our society of finances. And I think something like this is really going to put more of a spotlight on that, because it's such a highly visible thing with athletes and the NIL. And again, I don't know if you remember, Brandon. Remember, go back to I think it was the 2000 NBA season when they went on strike again. They went on strike and they were on strike for a little over half a season. The Bulls were coming off their last of their championships with Michael Jordan the year before. And so I believe it was San Antonio that ended up winning it on that shortened season on that. But I remember they were having charity games to help the poor people in the league that were only making the league minimum of the time of $300,000 a year. So let's go ask people that are making 30, 40, 50 grand a year to come in and help supplement the lifestyle of someone that poor soul that only makes 300,000 a year because they can't manage their 300,000 a year. Yeah, that's nothing compared to what a lot of the other guys are making. But you and I would take that in half a second, and we'd live pretty dang well off of it. And so it's just, you look at something like that. And I remember one of the star centers at the time, I won't mention his name, one of the star centers at the time made the statement, well, I know we make a lot of money, but we also spend a lot of money. Well, then you're a moron. Because it doesn't mean you can't spend money, but you still, if you make $3,000 a month, don't live beyond your means. If you make $3 million a month, don't live beyond your means, or you're going to get yourself in trouble.
Yeah. And bottom line, there's a lot of education that needs to happen. I mean, taxes is a whole nother thing. These guys, you're going to get taxed on that NIL money. A lot of guys don't think about that, or women don't think about that. Armando Baycott was doing those TurboTax commercials during March Madness this past year. And it got a lot of people thinking, oh yeah, shoot, I got to do taxes now. How do I do that? In general, like I said, I think this will ultimately tamp down. The salaries will go down. And if I'm an athlete, a college athlete, be careful what you wish for. If you're a paid employee, if you're getting paid for a service, they can terminate that service at any time. So that's right. And that comes back to maybe contracts and those types of things that can keep an athlete in a place longer, but also tie that place to the athlete as well. A lot of these kids were making money before they ever hit college. I mean, you look at the Cavender twins, those girls that ended up going to Fresno State. They were millionaires off of their social media and off of all that stuff before they even went to college. Arch Manning set the bench last year, $3.2 million. You get back to giving money to people who haven't proven anything yet. Well, they proved it at the high school level, but he got to college. Now, obviously, he was at a top tier college in Texas playing for Sarkeesian, but he hasn't proven anything at the college level yet. And still to this day, he has not proven anything at the college level. Now, we all anticipate that he's going to be a good quarterback at some time somewhere. And that money, in the positive sense, is kind of keeping him around and saying, okay, maybe stay where you're at. Don't get too discontented, and maybe that lessens the blow of not starting a little bit and stuff like that. But at the same time, who's paying that money? And are you getting your $3.2 million worth? Yeah.
Something to look at. The
juice is not worth the squeeze. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Guys, just quickly, don't forget, once again, you can watch this show on IdahoSports.com's YouTube channel, Facebook page, and X account. You can also listen to the show on IdahoSports.com or wherever you download and subscribe to podcasts. And don't forget, hop on IdahoSports.com. Brandon Baney, along with other people that he brings in to do stories and stuff. Right now, the statewide Idaho football preview is on and ready to roll. You got prep casts, schedule, scores, rosters, standings, polls, game streams, action photos as it gets going. And of course, we got a new twist this year, Brandon. We're going to have some fun games, multi-camera views, more of a professional setup. That'll be a lot of fun. We'll still have a lot of single camera games, where we go to people. We have great broadcasters that come in and do some things we've always done, but we're making these twists this year and some changes to IdahoSports.com, and it's bringing some excitement to us right now, but I think especially to the viewer.
Yeah, like the NCAA, we've got to learn and adapt and grow, right, Lance?
That's right. That's right. Things change. It wasn't always 64 team plus tournament. They had to change it. So anyway, so back to what we were talking about. I think we kind of summed up the transfer portal as far as things that can be done. But you look at the NIL right now, and let's talk about how teams can even hope to compete in the NIL. You got a Boise State, for example, and then they're not too far from Oregon State just down the road. They've got a Utah, a BYU that are in the Big 12, and they all have deeper pockets than a place like a Boise State. And then you take those schools, and how are those other schools going to compete against an Alabama, a Texas, an Oklahoma, a Clemson that have even deeper pockets than they do? What's going to happen as this moves forward? Are we going to see something like where they create another division with just maybe the 4 power conferences? It used to be 5, but we don't have 5 anymore with the essentially disbanding of what it's still technically the Pac-12, but it's not existent, at least as the way what it was. Are we going to see something like, okay, those Power 5, here's their own tournament, here's their own championship, and then everybody that's not a Power 5, here's their own championship, and then you got FCS, who has their own championships. So what's going to happen in the future as we look at this? Obviously, teams are going to be awesome in those Power 4 conferences, but what's going to happen to everybody else?
Lance, it's like a commentary on American society. The rich are going to get richer. The impoverished are going to get more impoverished. And that middle class is going to wither away, and they're going to be pushed one way or the other into one of these 2 buckets. I'm a Montana Grizzly fan. That's where I grew up. I used to worry that, oh man, all these Big Sky Conference schools are going to get left behind because Boise State moved up and Idaho moved up and Nevada, Reno moved up, and look at the success they're having. But now, looking ahead at the long game, those Big Sky schools, Idaho State, Montana, they're in a better spot where the FCS is fairly stable right now in terms of there's
in fact, probably more stable than it's ever been. In fact, it's fun. It's watched more than it's ever been.
Yeah. And for example, a Boise State, a Nevada, a Fresno State, Troy, Appalachian State, all these schools that have moved up, but aren't at the big table. They're kind of stuck in like this weird purgatory where they're trying to compete financially with the big dogs, but it can't. And they don't really have a home to call. Like, oh, there's the possibility you get a spot in the college football playoff. Okay, you get one shot at the golden ticket, but that's not sustainable long term. And so I think schools are going to have to make that choice. Do we drop back down? Do we reconstitute the FCS as it is, or do we try to get a seat at that table? The problem is it's like, again, musical chairs. There aren't many chairs left to be filled.
Well, you got some of those schools that realized early, hey, FBS isn't the place for us. University of Idaho went up, dropped back down, now in the Big Sky again and doing very well after really not being able to compete at the FBS level. They're doing very well at the FCS level. And of course, they were kind of brought down. There's some other reasons as well. They were struggling with, you have to have a kind of a minimum fan base that shows up to games and things like that. But I think this has been a good move for them. And I think you look at the Big Sky. Big Sky is a fun conference. Now, of course, there is no anything other than there's no FBS, FCS, and all that for basketball. They're all Division I for that until you drop to Division II. But for football, that's the place where people. I think that choice is going to have to come into it. You can have, I don't think overall basketball will see the negative effects as much as football will. Because, basketball, you'll still have these, you only got 5 players on the floor, and you'll still have these schools that occasionally, look what University of Oakland did, just north of Michigan there, in the NCAA tournament. And those are teams that on any given night, they can step up and beat a team. But, I'm sorry. Southern Utah University is never, ever, ever, ever going to step up and beat Alabama. It's just not going to happen. There's just too much in a football game that way. And that's not to knock on Southern Utah University. That's just saying that's the kind of difference that you're getting between those types of schools.
And it's really made me not want to watch the big time college football anymore, Lance. It's been, I got to be honest, it's been 4 or 5 years since I tuned into, like, on a regular basis to watch Alabama, Washington, UCLA, all these schools. My Saturdays are spent watching the Big Sky Conference, and I'm content with that. I don't need to see the same 4 teams always compete in the college football. I think it's a little stale sometimes.
Yeah, it does, and it gets really stale when everything's a blowout. It's one thing if it's a really competitive game, and again, this is kind of the NIL that we're talking about that's creating this, and just because something's legal doesn't mean it's good. And again, I'm not saying the NIL is all bad. I think it starts from maybe a good spirit of intention, but there's going to have to be in the future some limits put on it. There's going to have to be some boundaries put in there, or you're not just going to hurt a lot of that, what we call the middle class of football. It's not only going to hurt that. I think you're going to end up hurting a lot of individual athletes. And this is something that's crossed my mind too. That narrows down the number of people that can go into those places. It really, NIL narrows down the number of people that can really go in and make a name for themselves and do something. It used to be, you could go in, you could make a name for yourself. You might get drafted out of an FCS school, drafted out of a mid-major, things like that. We might not see that as much anymore. And you look at football into the last couple of decades has been under a microscope anyway. When you look at, the injuries and so forth, you might end up even not having as good a talent pool down the road if things stay the same way they are, because you might get kids that say, listen, it's not going to do me any good to go to a mid-major. It's not going to, and I can't get in to the NIL money the others are. I'm going to go to another sport. I'm not going to put my body on the line. Or parents saying, I'm not going to let my kid put his body on the line. Maybe that kid now ends up in soccer, which could increase some of the other sports, what they do, or I might do volleyball or cross country or whatever it is. But it could have an effect all the way down, because if people say there's really no place for me anymore, why put my body on the line in the sport that causes the most injuries of the major sports in America?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot more athletes choose baseball over football. Those are the two sports that seem most correlated. Some choose basketball over football, or soccer potentially instead of playing football. But I agree.
Well, and those are sports that are at the same time too, soccer and football.
Yeah. And again, to circle back to the Big Sky, I think this is where you're in a prime spot. If I'm a Montana, if I'm an Idaho State, I go to these high-end high school players and go, look, do you really want to take a shot right away at Oregon or Washington? And yeah, you might get a payday, which will be great, but you might be buried on the bench, and then your future earnings could be impacted. Why don't you come play for us for a year or two? We might be able to give you a little something. It's not going to be a lot, but this is your chance to prove those coaches were wrong. Then hit the portal and get that big payday. That's how I would sell it if I was an FCS coach.
Yeah, I think so too. I think FCS is always a little bit different recruiting anyway. The state of Montana requires X amount of Montana or scholarships given to Montana players coming out of there. Look at the success that they've had, with Montana State, and you look at their rosters; they're loaded with Montana players. It's like they're loaded with Montana players and then supplemented with maybe players from California or Utah or Oregon or Washington. Where you look at a lot of the schools. I think Idaho State's been a prime example that they're loaded with California players and supplemented with with a few Idaho players here and there. There's some good players in Idaho, and I think there's opportunities to keep some of those kids at home, to keep them at your school. I think Cody Hawkins is going to ultimately in the long run do a great job at that at Idaho State. I hope to have him here on the show sometime on Yappin Sports, because I think he brings in such a great potential. And look what's happened to Idaho, University of Idaho. Look how great they're doing. They've got a lot of Idaho players on that roster as well. A lot of kids that are doing good. And I think the Big Sky is the premier FCS conference anyway. And I mean, you look at the number of teams that are ranked every year in football, and I think that tells you, at least in football, they are the they're the standard bearer. They're the SEC of the FCS as far as that goes. But the FCS might only get stronger.
Yep. And I know that's a topic you're going to tackle on a future show is talking about keeping those in-state kids in state at your Idaho universities and colleges. And you're going to have on somebody much more qualified than me to talk about that too. So,
well, but you know, as a fan, perception is reality. And you know, it affects fan bases of places. You know, I like to see in an FCS type school that has more of a local fan base, not so much as a global fan base like a Utah or a BYU or an Oregon or places. And I only bring these schools up because they're closer in proximity to our local ones. You know, Boise State has a pretty good fan base out there. But what you have is a lot of FCS fans. Their main team is an FBS school, and then FCS, yeah, this is my FCS team here. And so it's a lot of local people. You know what? You keep local talent around, and that puts rear ends in your seats at your stadium because they've seen that kid through high school. They want to see him go in. And let's face it, a guy like a Taysom Hill is never going to go to an Idaho State, which was his hometown team, because he's a true FBS talent. They knew it. He signs with Stanford, with Harbaugh out of college, or pardon me, coming out of high school after his mission. Harbaugh had left, had gone to the NFL at that time, to the Niners, before going to Michigan. And so, you know, Taysom Hill transfers to BYU. Of course, he's had that great career with the Saints and stuff like that. But that's okay. What's happening is if you're an Idaho State, you can't afford for a great Southeast Idaho talent that is an FCS level talent to sign with a Weber, to sign with a Montana, to sign with a Montana State, or maybe get looked over and end up at a Western Montana, NAIA up in Dillon or a place like that. You know, there's good athletes that have got to stay home and can really benefit programs.
Yeah, I just remember a couple of years ago, Titan Fleischman, great offensive tackle from Century High School in Pocatello. Montana State came down to Idaho State's backyard and plucked him out. And like they came into our territory and did that. I was living in Pocatello at the time. I was like, oh man, that can't happen. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see, you know, how that trend and what you just described, Lance. There's one college team in Idaho that I've seen really capture that, where the fan base is hyper passionate about that school. There's a lot of Idaho players on the team, and that's the College of Idaho. At the NAIA level, they have really captured that magic in a bottle, and they've been really successful.
Yeah, the Yotes. Yeah. National champions last year in basketball, you know, or I mean, basketball.
Yeah.
2 years ago. Was it 2 years ago or last year?
2 years ago. And then
2 years ago. That's right.
And they got to the football championship last year.
Yep. They got to the football championship, but yeah, they've done it. The Yotes have a ton of Idaho talent. You know, I think Northwest Nazarene brings in some good Idaho talent as well. CSI brings that in. You know, Rick's College, back when it was Rick's College, of course, it's BYU Idaho now, but it doesn't have the sports programs, the intercollegiate sports like it used to. But they were more global because it was church related. So they might only have a couple Idaho kids, you know, and a lot of others. But you look at the other schools, Northern Idaho has a lot of kids either from Idaho or close to that area. You know, you might get some kids from Spokane over and stuff like that, because that's, you know, a 20-minute drive or so, you know, but yeah, I think University of Idaho, or pardon me, College of Idaho, I think has done it correct, and they've done it through all their sports. Look at their cross country programs and those things. You know, they've done a great job, I think, of keeping people around. But well, folks, this is what we want from you. If you're listening to this, give us a shout out. Go to Brandon at IdahoSports.com. That's Brandon at IdahoSports.com. Tell us what you think about the NIL, about the transfer portal. And again, don't just tell us NIL is going to kill college sports. Tell us, if that's what you think, tell us why you think it is. If you think it's good, tell us why you think it's good. Same with the transfer portal. You know, don't just give us a blanket statement. Tell us why you think it is that way and why it will survive or won't survive. We also want some fun shout outs. I'm going to pick the best one each week. Maybe I'll have Brandon pick it, because he might be a better picker than me. And and we'll send you a shirt, Yappin Sports shirt. Of course, Yappin Sports brought to you by IdahoSports.com. And once again, don't forget, you can watch this show on IdahoSports.com YouTube channel, Facebook page, X account. You can also listen to the show on IdahoSports.com or wherever you download and subscribe to podcasts. This is Lance Taylor. like to thank my guest, Brandon Baney, the producer at IdahoSports.com, coming in and covering this topic today. Come back on Thursday. It's every Tuesday and Thursday, Yappin Sports on IdahoSports.com.